Hello, everyone. Good evening. How are you? Ishmael, hello. Are you and your wife both joining us this evening? Real quick, can everyone hear me all right? Good evening, everyone. Hello, hello. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to see you guys again. Ah, that was a really fast month that passed for not doing any book readings, but it was a fast month, but I'm glad we're back to reading now. Hello, everyone. Hello. I'm so excited to see you all here this evening. For anyone who may not know, we are doing a book reading this evening. We are kickstarting our series again. So it's a completely different series this time, but I took a month off in July, and so we're picking up more books for the rest of the year. So if you guys are interested in joining along, this is the first. Thank you for my cowboy hat and my mustache. Thank you, thank you. So we'll be starting this series, the Hawksong series by Amelia Atwater Rhodes. I picked this series because I think it's a four-part. It's either a 4 or a 5-part series. And I was rummaging through my books the other evening. Well, some of these books are mine, and some of these books I'm actually book sitting for a dear friend of mine. But I've been book sitting for a while now, so I think I may have adopted some of these books as my own. Naturally, if she ever wants them back, she can have them because they are hers after all. But this series, I actually found this series in high school. And it's a really easy read. I mean, you can see the book's it's not a big book. It's really not. It's light reading. It's something fun. It's a fantasy novel. And it is part of I think it's a 4-part series. I'm pretty sure. So, because the last few books we did, one was about World War II, and it's just, and another one was about a lot of like political and social turmoil in the Renaissance Italian era, and some of it just got really kind of like, so I figured let's do a palate cleanser. Let's do some just really nice, light, easy listening, easy reading books just to kind of ease us back in. Because I'm trying to think. Yeah, like this book, this one is only 240 some pages long. So we'll probably get through this. I don't know. We'll probably get through this in like 3 readings, maybe 4, depending on how long we go. But just like every other time, we'll be doing from 8 to 9. For now, we're just going to do, well, today's Tuesday because yesterday my house died. But Mondays, 8 to 9 for book readings. And sometimes 8 to 9:15, 8 to 9:30, just depending on how I'm feeling that day. But I hope you guys enjoy just sitting back and listening and letting me read to you. And if you have any suggestions for future series books that you want me to investigate, hit me up in the comments and let me know, or DM me. And so that way I can keep track of your suggestions and maybe start adding them to the list. So, but like always, we're going to give it till about 8:05 just for people to come on and just kind of get settled in. So get on your jammies, grab yourself some tea and some snacks and get comfy. And then we'll get started in just like 2 minutes or so. Have any of you guys read this book before? Am I introducing you guys to a new series, or is this like an old friend that you've forgotten completely all about? Because when I read this in high school, I mean, it was, I liked it. It was an easy read. Like, it was just a nice kind of background noise type of book to read, if that makes any sense. So it was a nice break from like the required reading and stuff we had to read back in the day, like books like this thick, you know. So this is much more digestible, for sure. And I think for the most part, I'm going to say these names correctly. Some of them are a little bit, because some of this is, there's like a made-up language in here. So some of the words, some of the names I may not get quite right. I'm going to try and remember them correctly. So if you guys happen to know this book very well, and if I butcher some names, please don't hesitate to let me know so I can correct what I'm saying. So, but I did remember very much liking this series. It's kind of a Romeo and Juliet sort of a feel. You know, one house and another house kind of at war because no one knows why anymore. But it was just, you know, it was kind of fun. Light and fun. So, all right, so it's 8:05. We're going to get started. All right. And, well, just real quick, thumbs up or hearts or something if you can hear me well enough, if everything sounds good, just so I know. Because I'm pretty sure my connection is okay. I'm pretty sure my connection's good tonight. It was terrible yesterday, so okay. Cool. All right, well, I'm going to get started then. Here we go. They say the first of my kind was a woman named Alasdair, a human raised by hawks. She learned the language of the birds and was gifted with their form. It is a pretty myth, I admit, but few actually believe it. No record remains of her life. No record except for the feathers in every avian's hair, even when otherwise we appear human, and the wings I can grow when I choose, and of course the beautiful golden hawk's form that is as natural to me as the legs and arms I wear normally. This myth is one of the stories we hear as children, but it says nothing of reality or the hard lessons we are taught later. Almost before a child of my kind learns to fly, she learns to hate. She learns of war. She learns of the race that calls itself the Serpient. She learns that they are untrustworthy, that they are liars and loyal to no one. She learns to fear the garnet eyes of their royal family, even though she will probably never see them. What she never learns is how the fighting began. No, that was long forgotten. Instead, she learns that they murdered her family and her loved ones. She learns that these enemies are evil, that their ways are not hers, and that they would kill her if they could. That is all she learns. That is all I have learned. Days and weeks and years, and all I know is bloodshed. I hum the songs my mother once sang to me and wish for the peace they promise. It's a peace my mother has never known, nor her mother before her. How many generations, how many of our soldiers fallen, and why? Meaningless hatred, the hatred of an enemy without a face. No one knows why we fight. They only know that we will continue until we win a war it is too late to win, until we have avenged too many dead to avenge, until no one can remember peace anymore, even in songs. Days and weeks and years. My brother never returned last night. Days and weeks and years. How long until their assassins find me? Danica Chardin, heir to the Thule Thea. Chapter 1. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves and narrowly avoided retching from the sharp, well-known stench that surrounded me. The smell of hot avian blood spattered on the stones, and the cool serpient blood that seemed ready to dissolve the skin off my hands if I touched it. The smell of burned hair and feathers and skin of the dead smoldered in the fire of a dropped lantern. Only the fall of rain all the night before had kept that fire from spreading through the clearing to the woods. From the forest to my left, I heard the desperate, strangled cry of a man in pain. I started to move toward the sound, but when I took a step through the trees in his direction, I came upon a sight that made my knees buckle, my breath freezing as I fell to the familiar body. Golden hair, so like my own, was swept across the boy's eyes, closed forever now, but so clear in my mind. His skin was gray in the morning light, covered with a light spray of dew. My younger brother, my only brother, was dead. Like our sister and our father years ago, like our aunts and uncles and too many friends, Xavier Chardet was forever grounded. I stared at his still form, willing him to take a breath and open eyes whose color would mirror my own. I willed myself to wake up from this nightmare. "Hi, Miss Deborah. It's good to see you." I could not be the last child of Nicola Chardet, who was all the family I had left now. I wanted to scream and weep, but a hawk does not cry, especially here on the battlefield, in the midst of the dead and surrounded only by her guards. She does not scream or beat the ground and curse the sky. Among my kind, tears were considered a disgrace to the dead and shame among the living. Avian reserve. It kept the heart from breaking with each new death. It kept the warriors fighting a war no one could win. It kept me standing when I had nothing to stand for but bloodshed. I could not cry for my brother, though I wanted to. I pushed the sounds away, forcing my lips not to tremble. Only one heavy breath escaped me, wanting to be a sigh. I lifted my dry eyes to the guards who stood about me protectively in the woods. "Take him home," I ordered, my voice wavering a bit despite my resolve. "Chardet, you should come home too." I turned to Andreas, the captain of the most elite flight in the avian army, and took in the worried expression in his soft brown eyes. The crow had been my friend for years before he had been my guard, and I began to nod assent to his words. Another cry from the woods made me freeze. I started toward it, but Andreas caught my arm just above the elbow. "Not that one, milady." Normally I would have trusted his judgment without question, but not here on the battlefield. I had been walking these bloody fields whenever I could ever since I was 12. I could not avert my eyes when we were in the middle of this chaos and someone was pleading, with what was probably his last breath, for help. And why not Andreas? The crow knew he was in trouble the instant I addressed him by his full name instead of his childhood nickname of Ray, but he kept on my heels as I stepped around the slain bodies and closer to the voice. The rest of his flight fell back, out of sight in their second forms, crows and ravens mostly. They would take my brother home only when it did not mean leaving me alone here. Danny. In return, I knew Ray was serious when he lapsed into the informal and used my nickname, Danny, instead of a respectful title or my surname, Chardet. Even when we were alone, Ray rarely called me Danica. It was an entreaty to our lifelong friendship when he used that nickname where someone else could hear it, and so I paused to listen. "That's Gregory Cobriana. You don't want his blood on your hands." For a moment the name meant nothing to me. With his hair streaked with blood and his expression a mask of pain, Gregory Cobriana could have been anyone's brother, husband, or son. But then I recognized the stark black hair against his fair skin, the onyx signet ring on his left hand, and as he looked up, the deep garnet eyes that were a trademark of the Cobriana line, just as molten gold eyes were characteristic of my own family. I did not have the energy to rage. Every emotion I had was cloaked in the shield of reserve I had learned since I was a chick. Evidently, the Serpient Prince recognized me as well, for his pleas caught in his throat and his eyes closed. I stepped toward him and heard a flutter of movement as my guards moved closer, ready to intervene if the fallen man was a threat. With all his various scratches and minor injuries, it was hard to tell where the worst of the damage was. I saw a broken leg, possibly a broken arm. Either of those he could heal from. What would I do if that was the worst? If he was hurt, but not too hurt to survive. This was the man who had led the soldiers that had killed my brother and his guards. Would I turn my back so the royal flight could finish what all these fallen fighters had not? For a moment I thought of taking my knife and putting it in his heart, or slitting his throat myself and ending the life this creature still held while my brother lay dead. Despite my guard's protest, I went again to my knees, this time beside the enemy. I looked at that pale face and tried to summon the fury I needed. His eyes fluttered open and met mine, a muddy shade of red. Gregory Cobriana's eyes were filled with pain, sorrow, and fear. The fear struck me the most. This boy looked a couple of years younger than I was. Too young to deserve this horror, too young to die. Bile rose in my throat. I loved my brother, but I could not murder his killer. I could not look into the eyes of a boy terrified of death and shaking from pain and feel hatred. This was a life. Serpient, yes, but still a life. Who was I to steal it? Only as I recoiled did I see the wound on his stomach, where a knife had dragged itself raggedly across the soft flesh, one of the most painful of mortal blows. The attacker must have been killed before he could finish the deed. Perhaps my brother had held the knife. Had he lain dying alone like this afterward? I felt a sob choke my throat and couldn't stop it. Gregory Cobriana was the enemy, but here on the battlefield he was just another brother to another sister, fallen on the field. I could not cry for my own brother. He would not want me to. But I found myself crying for this hated stranger and the endless slaughter that I had almost contributed to. I spun on Ray. This is why this stupid war goes on. Because even when he's dying, you can only feel your hate, I spat, too quietly for the Serpient Prince to hear me. If I was in this man's place, I would pray for someone to kneel by my side, I continued, and I wouldn't care if that person was Zane Cobriana himself. Beside me, for a moment his hand touched my hand, unexpectedly. His gaze met mine, and I heard him sigh quietly with understanding. I turned back to the Serpient. I'm here. Don't fret, I said as I smoothed the black hair from Gregory's face. His eyes filled with tears, and he muttered something that sounded like thank you. Then he looked straight up at me and said, End it, please. These words made me wince. I had been thinking the same thing just moments before, but even though I knew he was asking me to stop the pain, I did not want mine to be the hand that ended another's life. Danny? Ray asked worriedly when a tear fell from my eyes onto Gregory's hand. I shook my head and wrapped my hand around Gregory's cool one. The muscles tightened, and then he was gripping my hand like it was his last anchor to earth. When I drew the knife from my waist, Ray caught my wrist and shook his head. Quietly, so Gregory could not hear, I argued. It could take him hours to die like this. Let the hours pass, Ray answered, though I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten. Serpient believe in mercy killing, but not when it's the other side who does it. Not when it's the heir to the Tuuli Thea who ends the life of one of their two surviving princes. We sat in the field most of the day, until Gregory's grip on my hand loosened and his ragged breathing froze. As I had done so often for dying avian soldiers, I sang to pass the time and to distract him from the pain. The songs were about freedom. They were about children, able to play and sing and dance without worrying that they would be harmed. The song I loved most of all, though, was the one my mother used to sing to me when I was a child, before I had been given round-the-clock nurses, maids, servants, and guards. It was from long before my mother had become a distant queen with too much dignity to show affection even to her last remaining daughter. I would have given up all the pampering and all the respect I had earned those past few years if I could have climbed into her arms and gone back to a time when I was still too young to understand that my father, my sister, and now my brother had been butchered in this war, which had been going on so long nobody could tell any more what it was about, or who had even started it. I had heard of avians and serpient who had lived 500 years or more, but no one did that now. not in a time when both sides slaughtered each other so frequently and so efficiently. The only male child left to inherit the Serpient throne was Zane Cobriana, a creature whose name was rarely mentioned in polite avian society. And if he died, hopefully the murderous royal house of the Serpient would die with him. Yet now that Gregory Cobriana, the youngest and last brother of our greatest enemy, was dead in front of me, I could not be grateful for the loss. All I could do was sing gently the old childhood lullaby called Hawksong that my mother had sung to me long ago. I wish to you sunshine, my dear one, and treetops for you to soar past. I wish to you innocence, my child, I pray you don't grow up too fast. Never know pain, my dear one, nor hunger, nor fear, nor sorrow. Never know war, my child, remember your hope for tomorrow. By the time I found sleep that night, back in the Hawk's Keep, my throat was tight with too many tears unshed, screams unuttered, and prayers whose words I could never seem to find. Quick check-in, how's everyone doing? Hi, Miss Deborah. Yeah, take it easy with your back. Everyone take it easy with their backs, please. Chapter 2. My mother, Lady Nicola Chardet, was like a bronze statue as she watched the pyre consume yet another of her children on Mourner's Rock. Firelight gave a copper cast to her fair skin, matching the gold of her hair and her dry eyes. Earlier the royal flight had been present. They had flown the body here and built the pyre, but as the fire snapped in its last moments, only the family of the deceased remained. It made brutally plain how few of us were left. My mother and I held silent vigil until the last ember had turned gray, and the wind had whipped the ashes into the sky. When the silence was broken, my mother's words were even and clear, betraying none of the pain or anger that she must have felt. "Chardet, you are not to go back to the fields," she commanded. "I know your view on the subject. I also know you will be queen in barely a month. Your people need you." Among avians, the heir traditionally became queen when she carried her first child. That did not seem a likely occurrence for me any time soon, but my mother had decided it was time for power to change hands despite tradition. "Yes, mother. I had been preparing to take the throne ever since my older sister died when I was 10, but my mother had rarely approved of my methods. I knew going to the fields was dangerous, as was visiting anyone outside the heavily defended Hawk's Keep, but how could I rule my people if I refused to leave the safety of my home? I could not know them if I never faced the world they lived in, and that included the spattered blood of the fields. For now I held my tongue. This was not the time to argue. Yes, my power is back on, thankfully. Everything is back to normal, it seems. My mother left before I did. When she shifted form and spread her wings, a black cloud seemed to rise from the cliffs above us, half a dozen ravens and crows guarding her even there. I hung back a bit, hesitating on the black rock and repeating over and over the words, "No time for tears." I knew there would be no energy left for living if I grieved too deeply for each loss, but each funeral was harder to turn from than the last. Eventually I forced the creeping sorrow back until I knew I could stay composed when I faced my people, with no trace of anxiety on my face or grief or anger in my eyes. As I lingered, a single crow detached from the rock above me. He circled once before returning to his post, assured that I was still here, standing strong. There was nothing left to do. As I shifted my tired human form into one with powerful wings and golden brown feathers, I let out a shriek. Fury, pain, fear, they dissolved into the sky as I pushed myself beyond them with every smack of my wings against the air. It was late when I returned to the Hawk's Keep, the tower that housed what was left of my family, the highest-ranking soldiers and the most prominent artisans, merchants, and speakers of the avian court. With my mother's command, the 7 floors of the keep had changed from my safe home to my prison. Instead of being a refuge from the blood and pain, the walls were suddenly a trap, keeping me from reality. With Andreas standing near in case of trouble that never occurred inside, I lingered on the first floor, 15 feet above the ground level courtyards and training grounds. I watched the last of the merchants pack up their belongings, some grateful to have rooms in the higher levels of the keep, but most wary of the world they would be returning to when they left here. Market lasted from dawn to dusk. Merchants and storytellers would gather on this floor, along with common people during the day. The Thule Thea and her heirs, her only heir now, would go among them and listen for complaints. The artisans had nearly been strangled out of avian society by the war, but my mother had started encouraging the ones who remained to show their wares. The avian market was famous for its craftsmanship, and losing those arts completely would have been tragic. Along with crafts, custom weapons, and other fine luxuries, stories and gossip could be found at the market. This was where merchants, farmers, and anyone else who did not fight heard all the details. I had seen enough Serpient soldiers fallen beside our own over the years, and now, with the image of Gregory Cobriana branded into my mind, I was reminded once again that they were just as mortal as my own kind. However, the fear makes all enemies more dangerous, and the stories told in the marketplace on this night were as sickening as ever. Parents lamented their dead children. One man broke down in tears, a display of emotion quite unseemly in avian society, as he recalled his father's death. Gossip traveled like a river, how the Serpient fought like the demons that legend said that they had taken their power from, how their eyes could kill you if you looked into them long enough, how I tried to stop listening. Hello, Maribel Rodriguez, hello. My people greeted me with polite words, just as they had the day before. Another hawk child was dead, along with a dozen of the royal flight, a score of ravens, another flight just below my personal guards in rank, and 18 common soldiers who had joined the fray when they saw their prince fall. So many dead, and nothing had changed. Milady? I turned toward the merchant who had spoken, a metalsmith of good reputation. Can I help you? He was wringing his hands, but stopped as soon as I spoke, his gaze dropping. When he looked up again, his face was composed. He held out a package carefully wrapped in soft leather, placing it on the counter for me to see. My pair bond was among the ravens who fell yesterday. I had been working on this for her, but if Milady Chardet would wear it, I would be honored. The gift he offered was a slender boot knife, etched with simple yet beautiful symbols of faith and luck. I accepted the blade, hoping I would never need it, but saying aloud, "It is lovely. I'm sure your pair bond would appreciate that it is not going to waste." The merchant replied, "Perhaps it might protect you when you go out again." "Thank you, sir. Thank you, milady." I turned from him with a sigh that I was careful not to let him hear. It was already too late for either side to win. This war needed to stop, whatever the cost. If only I knew how to end it. Chardet? I knew the young woman who approached me now from when we both had been children. Eleanor Lisa was an eternal romantic with grand dreams that I had wished I could make come true. The last time I had heard from her had been a few years before, when she had just been apprenticed by a seamstress. My smile was genuine as I greeted her warmly. "Eleanor, good evening. What brings you to the keep?" "I'm finally allowed to sell my work in the market," she returned brightly. "I was in charge of the shop today." The smile she wore faded to a somber expression. "I wanted to tell you. I heard what happened yesterday. With Gregory Cobriana." She shook her head. "I know none of this is proper to say, but I like to think we were friends when we were children." I nodded, and she continued. "When I heard what had happened, it gave me hope. If the heir to the throne can put aside the past and just comfort a dying man, perhaps anything is possible." She looked away, suddenly awkward. "Thank you, Eleanor." The prospect made me want to laugh and to cry. I settled on a tired smile. I did meet her gaze. I hope she saw my gratitude. "Fly with grace. And you as well, my lady." We parted ways, and now Andreas moved to my side. As always, he knew when I needed to escape. His presence would dissuade anyone else from approaching before I could do so. I wondered if he had heard Eleanor's words, but we did not speak before we both shifted form to fly above the market to the higher levels of the keep. Andreos stopped at the 5th floor, where his flight was quartered. I continued to the 6th. I passed the door to my brother's rooms and whispered a final goodbye before I entered my own. Chapter 3. I was a child, unversed yet in politics. The first thing that interested me in the court was a representative from the Shmanmik, a group not allied with my mother, the Tuulithea. He was a falcon boy, only a few years older than me, 12 to my 8. I was too young to know that my playmate made my mother very nervous, or that he was in the keep for any reason different from the other children's. Too young to know that he represented an empire older and stronger than our own, without whose support we would never be able to keep our heads above water when fighting the Serpient. I was just a child with no responsibilities, no understanding of politics, war, or pain. I remember the falcon very fondly, as my last memory of childhood. One of my tutors stepped out to speak with my mother in the hallway. "Milady Chardet, have you seen Andreos?" I looked up, hearing the name of my friend, despite the tutor's attempt at discretion. "I'm worried that he's gone out to the field to look for his father." I was too young to understand death, but I understood that my friend was upset, and so I had to find him. I stood to sneak out before my mother returned. I had known Ray all 8 years of my life, since he was 3 years old and I was newly born. He would listen to me more than anyone else. The falcon tried to stop me from leaving, but he had no authority over me, and I refused to listen to reason. My first breath of death hit me as I flew over the field. Yes, I knew of the war, but I had never seen the carnage up close, smelled the blood before. In the middle of it all, my friend Ray, hunched protectively over his father's body, crying. I landed at his side. I hardly had a chance to speak before the serpent appeared. Ray pushed me behind him. They scuffled, and I saw fangs slice into my friend's skin. Someone else attacked me from behind, but when I fought back, I was struggling with something as harmless as a wool blanket. I suddenly realized that I was dreaming a scene I relived in my mind almost every night. I had been knocked out. Ray had saved my life. His brush with death had changed him, forced him to grow up faster. After that day, he had made a point of training. He had joined the avian army when he was 13 and the Royal Flight when he was 15, and he had been the captain of that group for 3 years now. Despite knowing I was asleep, I could not wake. Lucid dreams had been a curse of mine for years. I walked the battlegrounds in my mind, through the woods and fields that I had been drawn to ever since Ray's father died. Pain, bloodshed, war, they had stained me that day. I walked from the dream of Andreos to one of my Alistair, the man who had been promised as my protector when we were both barely more than infants. Vasily had frightened me a little when I was a girl. He had seemed so cold and strong. The blood I saw in my dreams, he saw every day as a soldier. Yet I learned to understand him, and then I learned to love him, just in time to lose him, like I had lost so many others. I pushed the phantom away and found myself face to face with the garnet eyes of Zane Cobriana, the creature whose kind was responsible for every loss we suffered, every tear I held inside. My breath halted in my lungs, my blood turned to ice. I felt my throat constrict as I tried to scream. "Danica, are you all right?" I opened my eyes to find Ray searching the room for whatever had frightened me. His thick black hair had been hastily pulled back from his face, as if he had been roused from sleep. He was not supposed to be on duty until this afternoon, but I was grateful that he had been the one to hear me shout. "Yes," I said, but the trembling in my voice belied my answer. "Dream?" he asked. Ray was the only one to whom I confided in my nightmares. I nodded, sitting up. Morning was here, and if Ray was too, then there was something important to be done. Ray cleared his throat. "Your mother wants you to meet her downstairs as soon as you are ready." He left me to change, which I did quickly. My mother did not summon me for meaningless trifles. I stepped outside my room to find the Hawks' Keep swarming with avian soldiers. In addition to Andreos, there were 5 other guards next to my door alone. Out on the field, I understood this kind of caution. Inside the keep, though, it was unheard of. My mother isn't hurt? I asked with alarm, my mind latching onto the worst possible reason for this concern. She is safe, Ray answered, though he didn't sound as if he was completely certain. The rest of the flight is with her. Of course. Then why the sudden jump in security? And before he could answer, and who in the world is guarding the outside? There are about 24 soldiers ringing the courtyard and another few dozen in the surrounding land, one of the other guards assured me. They're good fighters. As for your other question, Ray answered, we seem to have a visitor, which is why your mother requested your presence in the first place. I had become used to having 1 or 2 guards at my sides, occasionally more if it was farther from the keep on one of the fields. Having this many was unnerving, even though the royal flight were trained to work smoothly. They kept out of my way and out of each other's, but the press of their bodies in the hall was oppressive in itself. What kind of visitor required so many members of the royal guard to be in the loftiest halls of the Hawk's Keep? No one so much as got inside unnoticed. To get all the way to my chamber would be impossible. My alarm jumped again when I realized that the guards who had preceded me had changed shape to descend to the ground floor. As a deterrent to flightless enemies, there were no stairs from the ground to the first floor. Aside from criminals and traitors, even the lowliest sparrow commoner was met in the second-floor reception hall. Who is this visitor? I inquired softly. Zane Cobriana himself? Ray did not joke back with me. He waited for me to shift into my second form, hastening what was usually a leisurely, pleasant process, so that the hawk who emerged was more than a little ruffled. My mother was standing with her back to us as we entered the enclosed courtyard. The visitor was seated cross-legged on the ground nearby, with her eyes closed as if she was taking a nap. 4 of our guards surrounded her, showing just how afraid we were to have her near our queen. Even from across the courtyard I could recognize the black hair and fair skin. As I went closer, I saw her silky black dress with the white emblem sewn onto the low neckline between her breasts. On her left hand she wore an onyx signet ring. Either she heard our quiet approach, or she sensed us some other way, for the visitor opened her eyes just then. Suddenly my cool, golden gaze was met directly by her hot flame, the color reminiscent of pure, polished rubies. I looked away quickly, a shudder twisting its way up my spine. She's here in peace, my mother assured me immediately, but I could hear the "or so she said" in her voice, even though she didn't speak it aloud. Irene, may I introduce my heir and daughter, Danica Charday. Charday, this is Irene Cobriana, younger sister to Zane. My skin chilled just hearing the name, but I answered the introduction politely. What is this creature doing here? I was willing to comfort Gregory Cobriana on the field, but he had been dying. Seeing Irene alive, and well and dangerous, I felt less charitable. No doubt the guards had searched her and taken away what weapons they could. Probably none, if this ruse was meant to gain our trust. But everyone knew you couldn't disarm a Cobriana unless you took its life. Their scarlet eyes alone were a weapon, not to mention their poison, which could kill in less than a minute if they struck in full serpent form, and which would kill more slowly, but more painfully if they did so in a less pure form. Irene Cobriana spoke first, for which I was grateful. If I had opened my mouth, I probably could have caused a war with what I had said, if it had not been too late already. We want peace, Irene said softly, not rising. In case she tried to stand, the guards were prepared to kill her instantly. We're tired of the fighting and the killing. Someone grumbled. I thought it might be Ray. My mother directed a frosty glare at someone standing behind me. Irene also looked up at whoever had made the sound, and her voice rose with anger as she argued. I have lost my father to this war, 2 uncles, 3 brothers. A few years ago I lost a sister and a niece at the same time, when some avian soldier put a knife into her belly and killed both her and the child she was carrying. My mother is a good woman, but she is only Naga, and the people will not follow someone who is only Cobriana by name. They need their diente, and Zane is the last true heir to that title. Her voice quieted again. Excuse me if we don't completely trust you, Irene, my mother said simply, but your kind has not been known to uphold its word in the past. Irene lowered her head, and I could tell she was trying to speak around her anger. Gregory Cobriana died 2 nights ago, she answered quietly. She looked at me as she said the words. He was only 17, and now he is simply dead. I came here without weapons, with the hope that someone might listen. Zane wanted to come himself, but my mother argued that you would sooner put a knife in his back than listen to anything he had to say. And do you know what he replied? He said, let them. If they do, someone might finally be satisfied that they've won this war, and then maybe it will end. I barely managed to hold my tongue in response to that claim. Zane Cobriana was what the Serpient called an Arami, the prince first in line to the throne. Now that his father was dead, he was all but king. It was hard for me to imagine the leader of the Serpient saying anything remotely tolerable, much less blatantly self-sacrificing. Anyone who had spent enough time in the court had heard about the exploits of Zane Cobriana. In battle, it was said, he fought with single-minded fury, and a speed and grace no avian could match. He could catch the eye of his opponent, and that warrior would drag his knife across his own throat in a killing blow. He fought beside his people in battle and had never been wounded. Whispered rumor attributed his power to black magic and demons. And what exactly is Zane proposing? My mother asked, hesitating for a fraction of a second before she spoke the name, as if worried the word alone would soil the Hawk's keep. A truce, Irene answered instantly. Zane, my mother and I would like to meet with you, your heir, and whatever others you think necessary. And just where is this meeting to take place? My mother asked skeptically. Before the Mistari Disa, Irene answered softly. She took a breath and then explained. The Serpient have been fighting so long, their only reason for continuing now is to avenge the loss of so many of their kin to avian fighters. They don't trust the avians, and I think it would take quite a good show of faith from your people to convince ours that the Tuuli Thea is as honest in her desire to stop the fighting as their Naga and Arami are. I bit my tongue to keep from demanding just what kind of show of good faith Irene was suggesting. When she spoke, the Tuuli Thea said much the same. I take it Zane sent you as a show of faith from your side, my mother said. What is he asking in return? Irene shook her head. Only that you agree to meet with us on peaceful lands before the Mistari Disa. We would like to appeal to her for support of the peace talks and whatever is involved in those. My mother looked at me. Chardet? I started to object instantly, but then I remembered Gregory Cobriana's blood on my hands. I remembered the battlefields, the reek and the wail of war. I remembered my own Alastair, Vasily, who had once been promised as my husband, and my own brother, who had been no older than the enemy he had taken with him into death. So my words, when I answered my mother, were soft, but not without emotion. I do not trust them, mother, but if there is any chance that they might be honest, that Zane Cobriana might want peace. I took a breath because the very thought that Zane would ever waste a breath for peace was unnerving. Then I believe we should take it. More quietly I added, you know that I would do anything within my power to stop this war. My mother nodded. Andreas, your thoughts? The leader of the royal guard paused, looking at Irene. I don't like it, but Mistari lands are neutral territory. Even a cobra would be mad to try to ambush us there. The Mistari would tear the serpents apart. Very well, then. The Tuuli Thea gestured for Irene to stand and held up a hand to silence the guard's protests. Irene, please relay the message to your prince that we would be willing to meet him. Thank you, Nicola, Irene said warmly, informally enough that I saw a guard wince. She looked directly at me and she added, Zane asked me to convey our willingness to meet any day, any time, as soon as is possible. Please speak a date, and I will tell my brother. Again, my mother conferred briefly with Andreas, and then she answered, In a fortnight, on the first showing of the moon. It will take that long for us to organize our people. If the Serpient left the instant Irene returned to the palace and were willing to ride their horses to exhaustion, Their party would probably make the deadline. The Serpient would not have time to plan a sneak attack before the meeting. Irene curtsied, her face showing no annoyance at the rush my mother was pressing her people with. Thank you, Nicola, Danica. My best wishes go with you both until then. Chapter 4. My insides coiled in expectation of disaster as I made last-minute preparations for our trip to Mistari lands. I knew the tigers would not allow anyone to bring warfare to their land, but I could not help fearing that this was a trap, just like the one that had taken my father from me. He had received a forged missive from my aunt who lived outside the keep. There we go. He had received a forged missive from my aunt who had lived outside the keep, saying that she was dying and wanted her brother by her side. The ambush had taken them both from me in the same day. Andreas had spent the 2 weeks all but avoiding me so he would not have to face another interrogation about the keep's defenses, though besides small, unplanned skirmishes caused by chance meetings of our two kinds, there had been no battles since Irene Cobriana's visit. It was only a matter of time. Milady, a problem. I turned, trying not to glare at the sparrow who delivered the message. Can it wait? We need to leave. The sparrow shook her head. The Tuuli Thea told me only that you need to speak to the ravens before you leave for the Mistari lands. Flanked by Andreas and 5 of his soldiers, I landed in the courtyard where the ravens trained, a short flight from the Hawk's Keep. The guilty looks a few of them tried to hide at my arrival did not bode well. The commander, a woman named Karashan, who seemed more sinew than muscle, and whose arms bore many scars from her lifelong profession, approached me. Lady Chardet, to what do we owe this honor? I was told there was some talk among your soldiers that I should be aware of, I answered honestly. Karashan did not look away from my gaze, but she hesitated. Well, milady, thank the sky you're here, one of the younger soldiers said, giving a hasty bow before he began. With all respect to my commander, the orders we've been given are mad. I could not hear the rest of his words over the murmur that started then. I held up my hand, shaking my head. Your orders are to hold off, to defend the keep if it is attacked, but not to instigate anything, correct? I asked once the chaos had died down. The commander answered, Yes, milady, but surely there is some mistake. We'll be sitting here like lame turkeys when the Serpient attack. I heard one of Ray's people fidget behind me. My voice was calm, but my eyes were cold as I answered, We are going to a meeting to discuss peace, Karashan. The raven shook her head. I mean no disrespect, milady, but I have been a soldier for 70 years. The serpents do not know the meaning of peace or honor. If we do not attack soon and flush out whatever they have planned, you can be sure we will find snakes in our own beds. I resisted the urge to glance at Ray in a plea for assistance. This had to come from me alone. Karashan, you have your orders. They come from the Tuuli Thea, and they have been repeated by her heir. Do you plan to obey them? She hesitated. Do I need to remove you from your position to ensure you will not do anything foolish while my family is in Mistari lands? No, milady, she finally answered, voice soft. I will not give the order to attack. But, milady, if you do not let them move soon, my flight might not wait for my word. They are restless. I nodded. I trust you to keep them under control, Karashan, and if you cannot, I trust you to bring word to my mother or me before they take action. Understood? Yes, milady. I returned to the keep, feeling like a stone plummeting toward I knew not what. I ran my hands through my hair, trying not to look flustered in front of the royal flight. Chardet? I turned to see Carl, one of the few members of the royal flight who was my age, watching me with worried eyes. Yes, Carl. I will obey your orders as always, milady, he assured me. But what if Karashan is right? You yourself agreed to go to the Mistari camps because there was a slim chance the Serpient might be sincere. So you too must know they are probably not. Isn't this too great a risk? I shook my head. If they attack, we will defend ourselves as we have after every Serpient plot in the past. But if they don't, then maybe we can find a way to make peace. Isn't the possibility of your children never having to fight worth the risk?" Carl nodded. "My trust is with you, my lady." I hoped I was worthy of it. Before we could speak more on the subject, we were approached by the Mistari's avian representative, Mikal, who had arrived earlier in the day to guide us into the foreign territory. "Are you ready to go, Lady Charday?" I sighed lightly, but nodded. "My mother?" "She is waiting downstairs for you," he answered. We joined the rest of our group, my mother, Andreos, and 2 others from the royal flight. The Mistari Disa and Dio, their queen and king, had limited our number to 5. We had been assured that the Serpient would bring the same. Shortly we were off to Mistari lands, with Mikal in the lead. The journey was not an easy one, even though my form was one of the strongest an avian could boast. The young goshawk was an extraordinary flyer, and he set a hard pace. Once we had crossed the water and were over the sweltering Mistari lands, the trip was decidedly unpleasant. The central city of the Mistari, if it could be called such, was surrounded by a natural ring of high stones. Inside those walls, the tigers of the Mistari tribes slept during the hottest hours of the day. Though the group had only been in this area for 40 or 50 years, since they had been driven out of Asia by the ever-spreading human population, they had already crafted sturdy walls where the granite mounds were too widely spaced or not high enough for their liking. Built into these walls and stones were the structures where the Mistari lived and slept, some grand and brightly decorated, and some little more than tents held aloft by simple stone piles. In the center of the ring, one of the giant boulders had been carefully hollowed out and decorated with carvings of each Mistari leader, including the Mistari Disa and Dio. This was their simple palace, the reception hall, where we would meet with the Serpient before the king and queen of these people, and chambers where the royal family slept. Our group was instantly surrounded when we landed and shifted into human form, but the natives relaxed when they recognized us. "The Disa and Dio are waiting inside the reception hall," a tigress told us. "The others are already there." We were hustled through the tall grasses and toward the grand stone structure that was the heart of the Mistari territories. Most of the Mistari stopped outside, but the tigress who had greeted us initially gently pushed aside the ornate silk weavings that hung in the doorway and invited us into the hall. The hall was more dimly lit than outside, but carefully cut windows shrouded with white silk let in enough light to show the brilliance of the Mistari palace. The floor was black stone, polished until it shone, and the smooth granite walls were decorated with an intricate mural of the African Serengeti. Brightly colored pillows formed seats on the floor, several of which were taken by the royal family's servants. Slightly raised on a red and black granite dais sat the Mistari Disa and Dio. All of those individuals quickly lost my interest. Within moments my attention was locked on another group, whose members were seated on the opposite side of the hall from our party. Irene Cobriana smiled wryly when I glanced at her, but already my gaze had moved on. Another woman, wearing dark burgundy, sat nearby. Her hair tumbled to her waist, a waterfall of onyx strands, and as she turned to look my way, I avoided her startling sapphire eyes. Charis Cobriana, Naga of the Serpient. The python might not have a cobra's power, but it was never a good idea to meet a serpent's gaze. There were 3 others who sat with them, 1 female and 2 male. The first man was lightly built, with ash-brown hair cut short. The woman was slender, with blonde hair that was tied at the nape of her neck before falling silkily down her back. They had the casual poise and obvious attention of guards. The male guard lingered near Irene, and the female near the man, who could be none other than the Arami of the Serpient. Zain Cobriana lounged on a cushion, his back resting against the wall, one leg bent and the other straight. The iridescent shimmer of his black slacks led me to wonder which of his kind he had skinned. His shoulders were broader than those of a common avian man, and in the position in which he sat, the black material of his shirt was pulled taut across his chest. On his left hand I could see the onyx signet ring. For a moment he was absolutely still. Then he looked up and unerringly caught my gaze. Twin pools of fire, a shade of red brighter than Irene's, held me tight. Time seemed to freeze for an eternity. Then his eyes released mine and flickered down my body, a quick scan that brought heat to my face. Andreos had caught my arm. With a glare at the serpient prince, Ray escorted me to my seat, blocking Zane from my sight. We're here to try and make peace with that? I thought frantically. My hands were cold, my face still hot. If he could affect me that strongly from across the room without saying a word, how would I ever dare to approach him civilly? The Mistari Disa stood and held up her hands for silence among her own people. The hush dragged my attention away from the Serpient leaders and back to the Mistari queen. I already know that this isn't going to be easy, the Disa began, but so long as both of you are willing to make an effort, there is always a chance for peace. There was some grumbling between the Serpient guards, but Zane and Irene both shot them searing looks, and they quieted. The Disa spoke first to the Serpient. Charisse, you are Naga, are you not? Charisse Cobriana nodded, but then answered aloud, I am, but my Diente is dead. Zane hasn't taken the throne yet, but you should address him as our leader. Zane, have you not taken a mate? Zane raised fiery eyes to the Mistari Disa. Taking a mate in the middle of this war would be giving a death sentence to a woman in return for her love. I have learned from experience that even a woman with child is not safe from the killing, not when she's carrying a cobra's blood. The Disa took a breath, nodded, and then turned to my mother. And among your people, Nicola, whom should I address as your leader? My daughter, my mother answered, Danica Chardet. She will soon be queen. How soon? The Disa asked gently, and my head lowered. My mother had prepared me to take the throne, but I was still uneasy about the prospect. My mother blinked and answered hesitantly. My daughter has no Alastair. The one she was raised with was killed in this war, and since Chardet is now old enough, I want her to choose her own. When I said soon, I simply meant... She paused, then gathered her thoughts and answered honestly. I am tired of this war, tired of being queen. My daughter still has faith, and if anyone is strong enough to lead us to peace, it is her. She will be appointed to Ulithea on her next birthday. The Disa nodded again. Danica, Zane, both of you have come here asking for peace. Both of your families are willing to follow you. Why do you need our help? Zane spoke first. Even if every one of us wants peace, our people would rather fight than be taken by surprise. Among my own guards, he said, glancing at his blonde companion, there is strong doubt as to how far we can trust the avians, and among many of my people there is even speculation as to why I would want to make peace. The Disa looked to me next, and I could only agree with Zane. We were barely able to control our soldiers these last 2 weeks. They won't believe the Serpient can be trusted, and unless we either give them permission to fight again, or we find some way to convince them that the Cobriana family and their people really want peace, my mother and I won't have the power to keep them from going against us. The Disa sighed and looked at her husband. They conferred quietly for a few minutes, and then it was the Dio who spoke to us. You are both saying that your people doubt your sincerity, and the other side's sincerity, the Dio paraphrased. You two are their leaders, and if you can set the example and show them how much you are willing to give for this peace, they will follow. He paused and then looked at me. The question then is, how much are you willing to give? I thought about all the battlefields, all the dead men and women I had seen, all the dying children and fathers and mothers I had held and sung to. I thought about my dead Alastair, Vasily, about my brother, Xavier, about Gregory Cobriana begging me to stop the pain. And I answered, anything. A breath later, Zane echoed my response with, everything. The Disa took over again. When you have hatred, you need to start with the heart to mend it. Similarly, when you have a rift between people as great as you have, the only way to bridge the gap is to start at the center. I glanced at Zane, wondering if he understood the Disa's advice better than I did. His eyes were narrowed slightly, as if he had an idea where this was going, but didn't much like it. You came for our advice. All I can send you away with is this. You can only so shut a rip by making the two sides one again. Danica Charday, Zane Cobriana, you said you would give up anything, everything, to stop the war. She looked at me, at Zane, and then she spoke to both of us. Never ask your people to do something you do not have the courage or the determination to do yourselves. If you want peace, start between the two of you. The Disa spoke to the entire hall as she continued. The best advice I can offer is this. Tie the two royal families. Make the two sides into one. If you are willing to trust each other and willing to put aside your anger and your hatred, then Zane Cobriana, take Danica Charday as your mate. Danica Charday, have Zane Cobriana as your Alastair. Andreas was the first to jump to his feet to protest, though the female guard shouted not out a moment later. Even my mother's voice rose at the same time that Charisse Cobriana stood. Zane's voice climbed above the others, saying, I think that is an absurd idea, while my own objections were frozen in my throat. Again, the Disa held up her hands for silence, and one of the other Mistari touched Charisse's arm and told her to sit. Another guard was doing the same to Andreas. The Disa's voice was soft, almost sad, as she asked, If you, the leaders of your people, are unwilling to make amends, then how can you expect your warriors to do so? More loudly, she told the hall, Stay here for the night. Think on my words. Zane's voice interrupted. Wait, please, dismissed. All of you, the Disa commanded. You may return tomorrow at sunset if you wish to do so. For now, seek your beds, rest, and think on my words. Just like that, we were banned from the hall. The Disa and Dio left their dais and were ushered out by Mistari guards and escorted to the rooms in which we would be staying. A young Mistari girl brought water to wash with, as well as an assortment of cheeses, fruit, and warm, freshly baked brown bread. I was grateful that the Mistari had thought not to serve meat, since, like most of my kind, I avoided it. Ray stopped in to check on me once, and I had to assure him repeatedly that I would be fine before he calmed down. He paused at the doorway and then turned back to me and apologized. Danny, I'm sorry I lost my temper in the hall today. You know I care about you. I always have. The thought of that snake coming anywhere near you. He trailed off and looked away from me as if he couldn't meet my eyes. I should go. Good night. Good night, Ray, I answered with a bit of a sigh. Then he was gone, and I was alone again, with only the flickering orange light of a solitary candle for company. I lay back on the soft fur sleeping pallet and watched the light dance on the ceiling as I thought. Never ask your people to do something you do not have the courage or the determination to do. If you want peace, start between the two of you. How could the Disa expect us to suddenly turn from enemies to a pair bond? She couldn't understand. The Mistari had never known the intense bloodshed and hatred our two kinds had known. But still, there was a reason why the Disa was considered wise, a reason why warring people had come to her lands for hundreds of years when they sought peace. Never before had anyone managed to get leaders of both sides of this war together. If that was possible, maybe Eleanor was right. Maybe anything was possible. All right. And that will bring us to the conclusion this evening of our first reading of Hawksong. Volume 1 of the Kishara series by Amelia Atwater Rhodes. I hope you guys have enjoyed the reading so far this evening. Thank you so much for joining me, and welcome back after a month-long hiatus of no readings. We will be back at it again on Monday, because I know today's Tuesday, so Monday from 8 to 9, maybe 9:15, depending on how things go. But please, let me know. I'm going to be posting this on YouTube. This is going to be, if you missed any part, or if you just want to simply re-listen to it again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this on my YouTube page. So if you'd like to just replay it again, or if you'd like to leave some comments on my YouTube page about this reading this evening, please let me know. I'll be looking forward to reading your comments, and I will see you guys later. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a fantastic week. Bye.